When the wooden box slipped from the top shelf and crashed open on the floor, my heart jumped before I even looked down. Papers, old envelopes, and a pale hospital bracelet spilled out across the dusty floorboards. My first thought was to clean it quickly before she came home. But my hand stopped above the envelope with my name on it. My full name, written in a handwriting I did not recognize. I was not supposed to be in her closet. I had only gone in to find an old scarf for the cold walk to the shop, but the scarf no longer mattered. The room felt different now, colder, heavier, like I had touched something sacred without knowing. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. There were 3 things inside: a photograph, a letter, and a paper I had never seen before. My birth certificate. My eyes searched the details, and something inside me started to shake. The name listed as my mother was not hers. The address was unfamiliar, and next to the word adoption, a date was written, a date I had never known. The letter was folded carefully, but the paper had grown soft and thin from years of keeping. It was from a woman named Eliza. She wrote that she had given birth to a girl, and that girl had been taken into care because she had no job, no home, and no way to feed a baby. She had watched from the edge of the hospital as someone took her daughter away. She had never seen her again, and yet she thought of her every day. I read the letter again, then a 3rd time, trying to make the words mean something else. But they didn't. They were clear and sharp. I was adopted, and the woman I had called Mum my entire life had never told me. I did not hear the door open downstairs. I did not hear the footsteps. I only heard my own breath as I stared at that name, Eliza, and wondered why no one had ever spoken it to me before. I had grown up in that house thinking I belonged. I had seen family pictures, birthday cards, school drawings stuck on the fridge. I had believed in all of it, and now, with one letter, it all felt like a story someone else had written for me. That night, I said nothing. I ate dinner in silence. I went to bed early, and in the dark, I held the letter to my chest, as if it might help me understand who I really was. The next day, I did not go to work. I walked through the town, thinking about every little thing. The way she had smiled when I was a child, the times she had brushed my hair, the stories she had told. Were they hers or someone else's? At the cafe, I ordered tea and sat by the window. An old woman next to me was reading a newspaper. Her hands looked like they had worked hard for many years. I watched her quietly and wondered what Eliza's hands looked like. I wondered if she drank tea. I wondered if she thought of me every morning. That evening, I looked through the rest of the box. There were more papers, medical notes, a faded photo of a baby in a nurse's arms. The baby had my eyes. I stared at it for a long time, and something in me shifted. I had never seen myself as part of another life, but now I could not stop imagining it. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city? Which country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to hear more every week. For 2 days, I did not speak to the woman who raised me. I did not know what to say. Every time I looked at her, I saw the space where the truth had been hidden. I saw the choice she had made to never tell me. And I did not know if I could forgive it, but on the 3rd day I stood in the kitchen and placed the letter on the table between us. She looked at it without touching it. Then she sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. She started to speak, but I raised my hand. I did not want reasons. I wanted time. I picked up my coat and walked outside into the cold air, letting the silence speak for me. At the library that afternoon, I searched for names. I looked through records, made calls, wrote notes. I wanted to find her. I wanted to know why, not for blame, but for peace. And then, one evening, I found an address. It was across the country, in a small town near the coast. I stared at it for a long time. I did not know if I would go, but something inside me said I needed to. I needed to see her face. I needed to know where I came from. The next morning, I booked a train. It was not a decision. It was a step, one I could not avoid any longer. I left a note on the table. I did not explain much. I simply said I had questions only one person could answer. Then I took my bag, the envelope, and the photograph and walked away from the house I had always called home. The train ride was long. I watched the trees pass, the rivers, the quiet stations. I thought about what I might say. I thought about what I might hear, but I knew there was no way to prepare. When I arrived in the town, the wind was soft and the streets were quiet. I asked for directions at a small shop, then walked to the address slowly, each step full of wonder and fear. And when I saw the door, painted light blue and slightly cracked, I stood still. I was not sure if I would knock, but I was there. And sometimes being there is the first and hardest part. I stood across the street from the house for a long time. The wind moved the trees slowly, as if the day itself was unsure of what would happen next. My legs were cold, but I could not move. I studied the garden, the windows, the small number on the door. It was an ordinary house, yet to me, it felt like a secret waiting to open. I imagined who might answer if I knocked. Would she recognize my face? Would she know me? Or had she moved on, locked that chapter of her life behind a door that I was now trying to open? A child's voice echoed from a nearby yard. A car drove past slowly. I felt the envelope press against my chest under my coat, as if reminding me why I was there. I had carried it all this way, not for anger, not for blame, but for the truth. I took one deep breath and stepped off the curb. As I reached the front gate, my heart beat louder than the sound of my boots on the stone path. I raised my hand. I paused. Then, with a weight heavier than fear, I knocked. The sound was small, but to me, it was everything. The door opened slowly. A woman stood behind it, quiet and calm. She looked older than I expected, with soft lines around her eyes and hair that had started to turn gray. Her eyes stayed on me for a moment. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply waited. I held out the envelope. I had no other way to begin. Her eyes dropped to the name written on the front. Her breath caught, just for a second. She stepped back, and I understood that I could enter. The house smelled of something warm, maybe fresh bread or old books. The hallway was narrow, filled with quiet. I followed her without a word. We walked through a living room with low light and soft furniture. It felt lived in, but not busy. Everything had its place. She sat down in a chair near the window and looked at me again. Her eyes did not carry fear. They carried time. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands resting on my knees. The envelope lay on the table between us. She picked it up gently, as if touching something lost long ago. Her fingers moved across the paper. I watched her face, hoping for something, a signal, a sign, a memory. She opened the envelope and removed the letter. Her eyes moved slowly over the words. Then she folded it again and placed it back inside. The silence between us was deep, but not empty. It was a silence full of what was not said, of all the years that had passed. My eyes moved around the room. There were no pictures of children, no signs of another life. I wondered what her days had been like. I wondered how often she had thought of me. She stood up after a few minutes and walked to a shelf. She took down a small box and brought it over. It was made of wood, and the top was carved with flowers. She opened it slowly and held it so I could see. Inside were 3 things: a ribbon, a photo, and a small silver bracelet. The photo showed a young woman with tired eyes and a newborn baby in her arms. The ribbon looked like it had once held something precious. The bracelet was tiny, with my birth name engraved on it. I stared at the bracelet. It was the same name from the hospital band I had found in the closet. I had never heard anyone say it aloud. She placed the box between us and sat down again. Her hands rested in her lap, still and calm. The air felt full, as if the room had been waiting for this moment for years. I felt something shift in me. Not anger, not peace, but something in between. I did not know what I wanted from her. I did not know if I needed answers. I only knew that I had to be there. I had to sit in that room and feel the truth around me. We stayed like that for some time. No words, no movement. Just the quiet weight of 2 lives touching for the first time. When I stood up to leave, she did not stop me. She followed me to the door. Her eyes held mine, and in them I saw both pain and peace. I stepped outside, and the door closed gently behind me. I walked back to the station slowly. The town looked different now. The air felt thicker, the ground more real. I sat on a bench near the platform and looked at the bracelet in my hand. My name was carved into the metal, smooth from age. I traced the letters with my thumb. When the train arrived, I stepped on and found a seat near the window. The world outside moved past me, but my mind stayed behind. I thought about the woman who had raised me. I thought about the woman I had just met. I did not know what would happen next, but I knew something had changed. Back home, the house felt smaller. The woman I had called Mum sat in her usual chair, reading the same book she had picked up a week ago. She looked at me, then at the bag in my hand. She did not ask questions. She simply nodded once and turned a page. That night, I sat alone in my room. The bracelet lay on the table beside me. I stared at it until the lines blurred. My thoughts drifted between memories and new images. I remembered birthdays, school plays, quiet Sundays, but now they felt like pages in a different book. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I made tea and sat by the window. Birds moved through the trees, and the light grew slowly across the sky. I thought about family, not as a word, but as a feeling, a space where love and silence could both live. I started writing that day. I wrote about what I had seen, what I had felt, what I still did not understand. The words did not come easily, but they came. I wrote in short lines, soft thoughts. I wrote about the blue door and the ribbon. I wrote about her eyes. The pages filled slowly. I did not know if I was writing a letter, a journal, or something else. But I knew I had to write. I had to make sense of the space between my past and the new truth I had found. Some days, I walked through the park near our home. I watched families, listened to children laugh, followed the sound of dogs barking. I looked at faces and wondered about their stories. I wondered how many of them carried hidden chapters like mine. One afternoon, I saw a mother lift her child into the air and laugh. The sound was light, real. The child touched her face and she smiled. I stood still for a long time, watching. Then I walked home, quietly, with something new inside me. In the weeks that followed, the air between me and the woman who raised me stayed quiet, but not sharp. We moved around each other gently, like people trying not to step on broken glass. She did not try to explain, and I did not try to ask. It was too early for answers, but something softer had entered our silence. Maybe the beginning of understanding. I found comfort in small things, folding clothes, making tea, listening to the radio. These simple acts gave my hands something to do while my heart continued its slow work. I wrote more. Each page helped me breathe. I did not try to make the writing beautiful. I only tried to make it honest. I also started sorting through old boxes in the attic. I found school drawings I had forgotten, birthday cards with short messages, and tiny clothes from when I was a baby. There were no signs of adoption in those boxes. Only years of quiet effort. It made me pause. One evening, I found a photograph of us, taken when I was 4. We were in a park, sitting on a bench. I was laughing, and she was looking at me. Her eyes were full of light. I held the photo for a long time. That light had been real. I could not forget that. That night, I placed the photograph on my bedside table next to the bracelet. 2 lives. 1 love, and a long road between them. I began writing a letter, not for sending, but for speaking, a way to open the locked door between us. I wrote about the photo, the bracelet, and the letter. I wrote about the silence and how it felt like standing in a room where everything familiar had been gently moved. I wrote about love, not the kind in books, but the kind that stays even when the truth changes everything. The letter was short. I left it on the kitchen table one morning before going out. When I returned, it was gone. She did not say anything, but that night, there was tea waiting for me on the counter, and the photo had been placed on the mantelpiece, her way of answering. Spring arrived slowly, trees turned green again, and the air began to smell of earth and new life. I found myself walking more, breathing in the change. It felt like the world was offering something new, and I was ready to accept it. One afternoon, I took the train back to the coastal town. I did not send a message ahead. I did not know if she would be there or if she would want to see me, but I felt I needed to try. I walked to her street again, slower this time, not with fear, but with hope. The light blue door was still there. I stood in front of it, then knocked once, softly. The door opened. She looked the same, but something in her eyes had shifted. There was less distance. She stepped back and let me in. This time, we sat across from each other at the table. I took out a small photo album I had made. Inside were moments from my life, birthdays, school events, quiet family days. I passed it to her. She opened it, and her fingers touched each page like they were fragile leaves. She looked at every photo carefully. Sometimes she paused. Sometimes she closed her eyes. When she reached the last page, she rested her hand there for a while. Then she looked at me with a sadness that was no longer sharp. It was full, round, and deep. I could feel the years between us, but they no longer felt like walls. She stood and returned with a book. Inside were names, places, and old letters. She showed me where she had written my name every year on my birthday. She had kept a record of each one. 23 names, all mine, written in the same soft hand. I could hardly breathe as I looked at them. We did not say goodbye when I left. There was no need. We understood that this was not an end. It was a beginning. I walked back to the train station with her book in my bag and a warm light in my chest. Back home, I started reading more about adoption. Stories like mine. Stories unlike mine. I wrote a few essays about what I had learned. I sent one to a small magazine. To my surprise, they published it. Messages came from readers who said they felt seen. That was the word many used, seen. I decided to study part-time. I wanted to work with people who had lived through quiet truths like mine. I wanted to help them find words. I wanted to be part of the soft work of healing. The woman who raised me asked if she could read my essay. I printed a copy and left it on her chair. She placed it in a frame and hung it in the hallway. That was her way of saying she was proud. Time passed, as it always does. The pain softened. The truth stayed. But it became something we could live with. Not a wound, but a shape. A form that became part of our lives. Every year now, I receive 2 cards on my birthday. One arrives in the post with a quiet message inside. The other is placed beside my plate at breakfast. Each comes from a woman who loves me. Each holds a different kind of truth. I still wear the bracelet sometimes, not every day, but on days when I need to feel strong, I wear it. It reminds me that identity is not a single line. It is a weaving of choices, losses, gifts, and love. One summer evening, I stood in front of the mirror holding the photo album. I looked at myself closely. My eyes had not changed, but something inside them had grown. I was no longer searching for where I came from. I was standing in it. I turned off the light and sat by the window. The sky was turning orange. A bird sang softly in the distance. I thought about the women who had shaped me, both in their own ways. I thought about how truth can hurt, but it can also set us free. My life had not become perfect. There were still days of doubt, still moments of distance. But there was also a new kind of peace, a peace that comes when you stop hiding from what is real. And now, when I say the word mother, I do not picture one face. I picture two women standing beside each other in the story of who I am. That winter, I received an unexpected envelope in the post. It had no return address, only my name in careful writing. Inside was a photo I had never seen before. It showed Eliza sitting on a bench by the sea, holding what looked like a baby wrapped in a white blanket. The edges of the picture were soft, almost faded, as if touched too many times. There was a short note on the back. It said, "Taken on the last day. I held you until they called my name." I sat down on the floor and stared at the image. Her face was calm, but her eyes were not. They carried something deeper than fear. They carried goodbye. I held the photo in both hands and whispered a quiet thank you, even though I knew she could not hear it. Maybe the world could. I placed the photo inside the album next to the others. It did not match the colors or the years, but it matched the truth. That was enough. That same week, I gave a talk at a local community center. The topic was identity and how it grows through change. I spoke to a room of strangers, some older, some younger. I told them my story without tears, without shame. I watched faces nod, eyes soften. When I finished, a woman stood up and said, "Thank you. That was my story too, though I never knew how to say it." It reminded me that stories are bridges, and sometimes they are the only ones strong enough to hold the weight of what we carry. When I returned home that evening, I walked into the kitchen. She was there, folding towels. She looked up and smiled. There was no need for words. We had become quiet partners in a truth that had hurt us both, but we had not let it destroy us. And perhaps in that, we had found something